Hello everyone, welcome back to Code with Beto. In this video, we are going to learn how to integrate sign-in with GitHub into your React Native application. And here I have a demo that what we're going to be doing. I have an Android emulator and also I have my iOS emulator. But I wanted to show you guys that this is going to work as well on production applications because all the time that I create tutorials about signing with Facebook, Google, and basically OAuth providers, everybody asked me in the comments if this is going to work on production. So that's why I created this application called Beto that you can see here, and I have here my device. So if you want to check this out, this application, the link is going to be in the project at codebeto.dev. And if you find this tutorial on the project section, and I'm going to show you in a moment, you can find the link to check out this application by yourself. And also it's going to be available, the source code, if you want to jump right in, is going to be available right there. So let's go ahead and try this out. I'm going to install this application. I'm going to press download and then open this application. All right. Now, just so you can see, we're seeing the same screen here. This is for the developer because this is a beta test. And so I'm going to start testing. And I already have my GitHub account in this iPhone. So I'm just going to press sign in with GitHub, continue. This is going to show this, this web browser that is asking me for my credentials. So let's go ahead and sign in. And I'm going to put my password. And finally, I'm going to say sign in. All right. Now I need to authenticate by pressing 98 in my application. So I should be able to go ahead and press 98 here and approve. Then go back to the application. And after a moment, I'm authenticated. And now they are asking me if I want to give access to Code with Beto, which is this application, my username, my data, and basically just public data. So I'm going to say authorize. And after a second, we're going to be authenticated. And we go straight to the home screen. And if I go to my profile, you can see that here we have my information. Of course, I didn't put too much time to fix this screen beautiful. But yeah, this is working. And now the cool thing about this is that if I close all my applications and then go back to Code with Beto, it's going to take me right into the application. Then we can also sign out, as you can see here. And if I close the application and open it again, it's going to state sign out. Now let's try this out on the simulators. I'm going to bring now the simulators. Let's try this out here. Let's press continue. Now I think, yeah, I have already my authentication in this emulator, so I can just go ahead and press authorize. And yeah, let's try this out on Android. This is going to ask me for my credentials. So, okay, now I'm going to press 44 on my device and approve. And if I wait a little bit, you would see that we are redirected back to the application. And of course, because I didn't fix the CSS, as you can see here, the styling, it looks off the screen, but this is working. Let's try to reload and see if this works. Yeah, and we are redirected back to the home screen, which is really nice. So we're going to be using Expo router for the navigation flow. We're going to be using TypeScript as the programming language. And yeah, so this is going to be a tutorial that is going to help you to really grow your knowledge about authentication. So if that's something that interests you, stick till the end and let's get started. Okay guys, now before we start, I want to invite you to check out my React Native course. If you want to become a master in React Native, go to codewithbeto.dev and you're going to find this course that is going to take you from zero to expert. And if you consider yourself like a mid-level React Native developer, I'm sure that is going to help you anyways. And also, I'm super excited to announce, and I'm very proud to announce that this course is now fully available in English. So you can take this course in English and Spanish, and you can change the language right here. So you can change between English and Spanish, and the videos are going to be with English audio. So go ahead and check it out, guys. And it's going to help you a lot. And also, if you want to check out the source code for this project, go to the project section and you're going to find this sign in with GitHub project that you can check it out to copy dependencies, to see some useful resources, for example, the documentation for GitHub and how to set your environment variables, because we're going to be using as well Expo 49, and we're going to be preventing to share our environment variables into GitHub, for example, by using an environment a.m file, right? So here you're going to have here you're going to find the links. If you are interested in the code, you can check it out. And now that that is out of the way, guys, we can actually go ahead and start creating this application. As you can see here, I already have opened this Firebase account that I have here. And if you don't have one already, I would highly recommend that you create one, because we're going to be using Firebase in this case. And we're going to be also talking about how you could manage the authentication if you weren't using Firebase. But if you want to follow along with me, I would encourage you to go to Firebase and create an account and then create a project. And now, just to show you guys, I'm going to go ahead and select code with Beto, which is the backend that we have for the application of the demo. And if I select authentication, you're going to see that I'm the only one user that has authenticated, but we can see here that the provider was GitHub. So this is working fine on production, which is great. And yeah, so let's go ahead and go back here to the applications. Now, just as a side note, it would be nice if you want to learn more about GitHub and OAuth apps and their documentation. I'm going to leave you the link on Code with Beto here. I'm going to add this link here if you want to check out like the scopes, what kind of information you can get from the users, and also what you can do after the user grants access to you or to your application, so that you can get more information. For example, you can do not only authenticate the user and obtain their information, but also you can do cool things like follow developers, delete developers, delete follows. You can manage the repositories and basically do whatever you want. This is really cool. And if you want to create an application that manages your GitHub projects, this is the way you do it. So yeah, you want to check it out. Maybe you want to check it out this as well. Also, here we have another page of the documentation, and we're gonna get to this in a moment. And also we're gonna need to create an application on our GitHub profile. And here I have the demo that I just showed you. But before we actually jumped into creating and setting up all this on the cloud, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new application using Expo. All right, guys. So what I want to do here, it's going to be just direct to my desktop. And once I'm in my desktop, I want to create a new folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new Expo application. So I'm going to say create Expo app. And because I want to use TypeScript, I'm going to say template. So if I run this command, I should be able to choose what kind of template I want to use. And we're going to be using Expo router, like I mentioned before. And if you are not familiar, don't worry. I'm going to be explaining everything. So yeah, let's go ahead and select navigation with TypeScript. And this is going to be GitHub tutorial. All right, and let's hit enter. Now let's wait a little bit until this is done. Okay, guys, so while the project is being created, I'm going to pull back my browser and let's go ahead and create a new Firebase project. This project is going to be called tutorial GitHub, and hit continue. Now let's disable analytics here. So I'm going to move this out of the way so you can see. I'm going to disable analytics. We are not going to need that for this tutorial. And yeah, so this is creating the backend for our project, and we can have sign in with many providers. We can integrate authentication, we can have a database, And also, if you want to learn how to integrate sign in with Google, for example, or sign in with Facebook, you can quickly go to codewithbeto.dev. And if you go to projects, you can quickly search, for example, here, Facebook, and you're going to find Facebook login. We also have Google sign in with Firebase, or just sign in with Google without Firebase. We have, Google Maps, and whatever you need, I'm sure that you're going to find it here on the project section. And notice that these projects are completely free. So go ahead and search whatever you need. And let's go back here. The project is ready. And this is going to redirect us back to this project that we just created. And now, once we are here, we can go ahead and select authentication and get started, this button here, right? So this is going to bring us to this screen. And what I want to do here, it's actually going to be select GitHub on the additional providers. Let's go ahead and select GitHub. And now this is going to ask us for a client ID and a client secret. And we get this client ID and client secret on GitHub. We need to go to GitHub and basically tell GitHub that we want to create an application that users can sign in using GitHub. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to my GitHub account, and just so you know how you get to this screen, I'm just going to go to my profile here. And if you haven't already, please follow me on GitHub. You can find all the projects that we create here in my GitHub as well, so you can check it out, the repositories. Just make sure that you are following me. And so once you are here, what you want to do is just go ahead and select your profile on the right side and select screens. So here, select settings. All right, so once we are in this settings screen, if you scroll all the way down, you're going to find these developer settings on the left side. Select that one. And if we zoom a little bit here, you're going to find these OAuth applications. So we want to create a OAuth application. And for those who don't know what is OAuth, OAuth is a protocol that allows you to basically access information for an application, in this case, Code with Beto application, using other websites. In this case, GitHub, it could also be Facebook, it could also be Google, right? So most of these platforms allow you to go, create applications as developer so that you can start authenticating users, okay? So let's go ahead and select OAuth apps. And as you can see, I already have this Code with Beto app, which is the one that I showed you at the beginning. But what you can do here is just simply select this button that says new OAuth application. All right, now here we need to register a new OAuth application, which, like I mentioned before, you would put the name of your application here. In this case, I'm just going to say testing, or just let's say just tutorial GitHub. And I'm just going to zoom here so we can see what's going on. Then we need to provide the homepage URL. I'm just gonna go ahead and select codewithbeto.dev. If you don't have one homepage, if you don't have a homepage, you can create just a simple one. It doesn't really matter, I would say. Then application description. So here you would put something like description. And then we also have this authorization callback URL. Now, this is really important, guys, because we are going to be using Expo. We need to specify that after we authenticate the user, we want to redirect them to the application, and we want to put this link here so that GitHub allows us to redirect back. Now, if you are not familiar with schemes, let me just go ahead and quickly explain to you. If we go to Expo auth session, I think, select this auth session, you are going to see that when we are using this package, there's many ways to redirect back to the application. And I think if I write scheme, so if I write scheme here, Let me see what we can find. Yeah, so if I go back here, you are going to see that when we are using standalone applications, and this is the application that you want to use if you want to build this application for production and have this working on a real device, right? Because there's other ways to redirect back to, for example, Expo Go. But in this case, we want to build the application and we want to have this working on a real world environment, which in other words means standalone application. So we need a scheme, as you can see here. And this scheme is just a string that defines like the URL of your application, if that makes sense. So what I'm saying is that if we go here and say, for example, let's say that my scheme is going to be code with Beto, but I'm not going to use this scheme now. I'm just going to say Beto. This is my scheme. Now I need to put it like a link, like ://, and yeah, that's my scheme. Now I'm adding these characters here, but the scheme is going to be just Beto. So I'm going to copy Beto. This is my scheme. I'm going to register my application here. That's all we need. And once you register your application, GitHub is going to give you, as you can see here, the client ID and also the client secret. Now we need to generate one client secret. And of course, guys, you want to be very careful with these secrets, because if someone else gets these secret keys, they can basically, they can create an application by your name using your credentials, and you don't want that. So yeah, now that we have, remember, we define our scheme. So what I want to do now is, before I do anything else here, I'm just going to go ahead and access my new React Native project and open this on Visual Studio. Okay guys, so I have here my new project. I used Expo, as you can see, and because we are using Expo router, we have this app folder that contains the navigation for this application. We also have this assets folder that contains the fonts and the images that we are using, components, constants. So this is pretty standard. And now I want to define my scheme for this application. This is the first thing that I want to do, because this is how we are going to be able to redirect back to the application. So if you go to the app.json, you're going to find here scheme. And I have scheme here already, because this is a template that already comes with this scheme. And I'm going to change this to be Beto. If you remember, this is my scheme, and go ahead and save. Now, if you don't find this scheme, don't worry, just add it. You can add it right here after icon, or you can put it at the end. It doesn't really matter. Just as long as you have this scheme and it's unique to your application. So I would say that use the name of your application or the slug to ensure that it's unique. And yeah, so once you have that, just to test this out, what we can do is just open the terminal and build this application for iOS. How you can build an application using Expo. The way we do that, it's pre-building. So I'm going to say npx expo pre-build. And because I'm just going to be testing on iOS, I can select the platform by saying, by passing the flag p and then say just iOS and hit enter. Okay. And what this is going to do, it's create an iOS folder for this application that is going to contain the native code for the project on iOS specific. Okay. Now they are asking me for a bundle identifier. In this case, I'm just going to select this one. So just go ahead and select this one. You can change this if you want. But yeah, I'm just gonna leave the default. And this is going to start creating this iOS folder, as you can see here. And this iOS folder, it's going to contain, like I mentioned before, all the native code and the build for iOS. We could do the same for Android, but in this case, we're going to limit it ourselves to just iOS. We already saw that this works on Android on the demo before, so just to keep things simple, I'm just gonna use iOS. Now the project it's built, So this is working. And what I want to do now is run this on my simulator. So the way we do that is just running npx expo run and select the platform, in this case iOS. And let's go ahead and hit enter. Let's wait a little bit. This is going to install the application on this emulator that I have here. And I'm just gonna go ahead and close this application that I had before. And while this is being done, we can go back to the GitHub application that we just created, copy this client ID, and we're gonna be needing this. So let's copy this. And let's go ahead and navigate back to the Firebase project and paste this client ID here. So I'm gonna enable and paste this here. And then we also need the secret. So for the secret, let's go ahead and go back here and generate a new one. If you don't have one already, just keep in mind, guys, that you need to be very careful with these secrets. So I'm gonna be using GitHub Mobile to authenticate. So I need to press 29 in this case. All right, 29. And once I press 29, they are going to generate this secret key. Now be careful, guys, because once you copy this, you are not going to be able to copy this again. So copy this and put it in someplace safe. I'm just gonna paste it here. And what I want to do now is go to Code with Beto again, select sign in with GitHub. And I'm just going to copy this end file that I have here, so we can have these environment variables in our application. I'm gonna go back to my project, and here in the root folder, I'm going to create a new file called .env and press enter. I'm going to save these credentials here. So let's copy this example that we have here. And now we just need to change these values for whatever we are gonna be using. So let's go ahead and go back here, copy this secret again and paste it here. And then my client ID as well. Copy and go back here. All right, and this is how it's going to work. Now, keep in mind, guys, that you could have your credentials for Firebase here, and I would recommend that you do this if you are going to put this on GitHub. But for now, I'm just going to delete these variables because I don't want to waste time putting these values here. But I just wanted to show you how you can prevent or keep safe your keys. So once you have this, save this file, and notice, guys, that this .env file, the way we are going to be using this file, it's just available on Expo 49. If you are using a previous version of Expo, this is not going to work. So make sure that you are using Expo 49. The way you can check this is just go to your package JSON, and here on the line 18, you're going to see that I'm using Expo 49. So yeah, that's why we are able to use these .env variables in an easy manner. All right, now going back to what we did, we make the build, and the build is ready, as you can see here. So it's asking me if I want to open this tutorial. So I'm gonna say yes, I'm gonna open this application. And what I want to do now is test that this scheme that we defined before, it's working. And how can we do that? Well, if we go to this Safari browser, and I'm just going to close this here. And if we put, in this case, Beto, which is my scheme, and then :/ and enter, this is going to ask me if I want to go to GitHub tutorial, which is the application that we just created. And if I press open, I'm going to be redirected to my application. And this is basically how redirecting works. So you create like this identifier for your application, and whenever they try to open this on a device that has your application installed, it's going to open your app. But let's say that we don't have this application installed here, we would get an error, or we would get something super weird from the web. But in this case, because we have Beto : // we are going to be redirected back to the application. All right, so we have the scheme. And if I go back here, we have copied these credentials. And now let's scroll down here. I'm gonna zoom here. Now you can upload an image for the logo of your application. Then we have the name, the homepage URL, and then we can update. Okay, so I'm going to press update because at this point we have created this client secret. And because I updated, I can no longer access this secret. So if you lose your secret, you would need to create a new one. And that is going to disable the previous one. So be careful. All right, and that's all we need for now. So this should be working, I think. Now let's go ahead and go to Firebase and just save this with our credentials. All right, and now we have GitHub already set up and we are good to go. Okay, so I'm just going to take this out of the way. I think that's all we need. Let me just double check quickly. All right, yep, I think that's all we need. And now we have the application up and running. And what I want to do now is actually start integrating all the things that we're going to be using. So let's go ahead and install the dependencies that we're going to be using for this application. I'm going to install some dependencies. So it's going to be really easy if we just go to codewithbeto.dev, and in this project, I'm just going to copy these dependencies that we have here. And we're going to be using, as you can see here, Firebase. This is the SDK. We also have the Expo web browser. This is the browser that we open when we are trying to sign in the user. Then we also have this Expo Auth session, which is the package that allows us to create the authentication with GitHub and also start the request for the authentication. And then finally, we have React Native async storage. I'm not pretty sure about this, guys, but I think Firebase uses async storage to store the authentication of the user. But because, well, I'm saying this because when I was creating the application, I had an error because I didn't have these dependencies. So I installed this dependency and everything was working. So let's go ahead and copy these dependencies and go back to this terminal and paste this here and just press enter. And this should be installed in a moment. So let's wait a little bit. Okay, guys, so the dependencies have been installed. And what I want to do now is just go ahead and make sure that I have everything here. Okay, guys, so one thing that we need to do now is actually change this metro config. So I'm going to select this file. And if you don't have this file, you can just create this file and you will be fine. And change this for this config. This would help us to have Firebase working correctly. And once we have this in here, I'm just going to close this file and actually start by connecting with our backend service. Now, if you remember, let me open again let me bring back this here. If we go back to Firebase, we created this backend project, but we didn't connect the application to this backend. So in order to start authenticating the user, let's connect our React Native application to this project. So if you click here, you can select project settings. And here in project settings, if you scroll down, all the way down, and select this web icon, you're going to be taken to this screen in which you can register the application that is going to be connecting to this backend. Now, it's worth noting that you can connect many applications to the same Firebase project, so this is cool. Now, if you want to name this accordingly, I would say my React Native app, so that I know that this is the mobile application, right? Then let's register this. Let's wait a little bit. And finally, this is going to give us the configuration that we need to connect the application to this backend. So I'm just going to copy this and continue to the console. All right, so let's go back to the code, and in the root folder, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this file, let's call it Firebase config.ts. Remember that we are using TypeScript, so let's say .ts. And yeah, so here we have these keys, and like I mentioned before, you may want to abstract these keys into the environment variable, but for now I'm just gonna leave them here. It's easier for me. And yeah, so this is how we can have the configuration for Firebase. And because we're gonna be using authentication, and that's the only service that we're gonna be using, and if you remember as well, we already enabled this service here so that we can import it here. So I'm going to import from Firebase /auth. I'm going to import get auth. Now this method, what it does is that returns the instance of the authentication that we have in the backend, so that we can register users and check methods that Firebase provides us. So here I'm gonna say export const auth, and this is going to be equal to get auth, which is the method, and this is going to take an application as parameter, and the application is going to be this one that we are initializing with this configuration. All right, this is the only thing that we need to do in this file, so let's go ahead and save it and close it out. Now let's go ahead and run this application by running npx expo run iOS. This is going to start my simulator. And if you notice, guys, because we are using Expo 49, we have these environment variables that are being loaded for this build, which is great. It means that we have access to these variables. All right, cool. So we have this application with the dependencies that we need. We have the configuration on the backend. We created our GitHub account and our GitHub application. So now we are ready to start integrating the logic for the authentication. And the way we do that, because we are using Expo Router, if you are not familiar with Expo Router, by the way, I would highly recommend that you check the documentation. But yeah, the way Expo Router works, it's file-based. So for example, we have the entry point, which is this application, this app folder. Then if you pay attention, we have this main layout file here. This main layout, it's the entry point for the application. And if we can see here that we are defining the entry point, which is the tabs. And if I keep scrolling down, we have this root layout navigation that contains a stack of screens. One of them are the tabs, and another one is this modal. Now, the cool thing about this is that if I go to the modal here, you notice that we have this, if I go back to, all right, so if I go to my tab number 1, which is this index, you are going to see that, okay, the layout. We're going to see that we have this tab 1, which is this one. And here we have this link that is navigating to this modal screen that we have out here, right? So if I press this header right button, we are taken to this modal. And basically that's how React Router works. I don't want to waste too much time talking about React Router, but if you want me to create a detailed tutorial about React Router, let me know in the comments and I will do it. But yeah, so the way we can handle navigation in an application with Expo Router, it's by having segments in this file-based routing. So let's say that we want to have two parts of navigation. One that we want to load only if no one is authenticated. But if someone is authenticated, we want to load the other part, which would be the home screen, for example. So let's go ahead and create a new folder inside this app and call this auth. All right. Now, if you pay attention, guys, each time that you create a route, in this case, these tabs, you can define as well an entry point, which is this index, and also the layout. The layout, I would say that is the entry point. And in the layout, you can define the screens and all the configuration that you want to have on this segment of the screen. And as you can see here in this example, we have this layout that is defining the tab number 1. And I'm going to minimize this. And then we have the tab number 2. And we are setting some options. And this is this works the exact same way as React navigation. It's worth noting as well that Expo router, it's based on React navigation. So if you know React navigation, you should be able to pick Expo router super quickly. So yeah, once we have this auth folder, what I want to do here is create my sign-in screen. That's all we need for now. So I'm going to say sign in.tsx. And this is going to be a simple component. So I'm going to export default function. Let's say sign in. And this is going to return a view. All right. I'm going to be using these views that we have in the theme file. And because we're using TypeScript, it's good practice to say that this is going to return a JSX element, right? And here we can have a text, for example, that says sign in. And this text is going to be imported from these components that come with the theme, which means that if I change this to light mode, this should be working. And yeah, so we have this sign in screen. Now we need to render this whenever we are not authenticated, right? Whenever a user is not authenticated. So how can we validate that? We need a higher order component or a way to manage the authentication in a higher level. So in order to do that, we can create a context, right? So let's create a context folder. And inside this context folder, what I want to do is create a context that is going to hold the authentication. All right, so let's create this file called auth.tsx. And this is going to be the context for this application. And if you are not familiar with context and use context, don't worry, I'm going to be explaining everything. And by the way, I was strongly inspired to integrate this authentication by watching or by reading the documentation on Expo. So if you want to check it out, go to the documentation of Expo and you're going to find how you can handle authentication flows. But yeah, so let's go ahead and start by importing all as React from React. Then we're going to be using as well router from Expo router. You should be able to just access this library because we are using this template. We're going to be using this router. Then we're going to be using this use route navigation state and use segments. Now, if you remember, I told you that we can handle this, or we need to handle this authentication in segments. We want to have authentication and we want to have the screen, right? The home screen. In this case, the home screen is going to be tabs and the authentication is going to be like the other segment, the authentication segment. Then inside this component, we're going to need as well some things from Firebase. So I'm going to say Firebase Auth. And here I'm going to import. I'm going to import a listener so that we know when the authentication state changes. Then I'm going to import the sign out method. And that's all we need for now. I'm going to import as well my auth from my configuration. So this is the instance of my authentication that we created here and we exported, right? So remember that this is this authentication, and we can use this authentication when we are calling methods from Firebase that have to do with authentication. For example, in this case, when we want to sign out someone, we need to specify which instance of the authentication we want to sign out this user from. Okay, well, when we are using context in React, basically it's because we want to have some state that we want to share between all the application and all the components that conform this application. In this case, we want to share the user information so that we know if we have a user or not, and we can render or we can load the navigation accordingly. So let's go ahead and initialize a state. I'm gonna say initial state. And for the initial state, I want to have the information that I want to share in this context, all right? And the information is going to be the user ID, the time when the user was created, display name, last login, photo URL, and provider ID. In this case would be GitHub, but if you have many providers, you can have Google, Apple, whatever. And maybe email as well, right? Okay, now, because we are going to be using this initial state to initialize this context, what we can do here is create an interface to start defining the type that is going to be used for this context. So we are using TypeScript, remember? So I'm going to say context interface, and this is going to contain a couple things. The first thing is going to be the user, and the user is going to be of type user. Now, this type user, we need to create it, and because we haven't already, I'm going to create it up here. This is how you can create the type. Of course, you can change this as you need. I'm just defining the type of each of these properties. They are all strings. And if you notice, I'm missing the email here. So the email is going to be a string as well. Then we have this, but this user, guys, can be null. So I'm going to say or null, right? Then another cool thing about context is that we can share not only state, but methods. So I want to share the sign in method, and I want to share the sign out method. All right. And this sign in method, you're going to see how it's going to work in a moment. I'm just going to comment this for now. And now what I want to do is actually create the context. So we defined these types, and we defined this initial state. So down here, I'm going to create the context. Okay, so this context, it's going to look something like this. It's going to be named auth context, and it's going to be equal to react.create context, right? This context is going to take a default value, as you can see here. So let's go ahead and create a default value for this context. We defined this interface so that we know that the initial state for the context could look something like this. And this initial state is going to be this one, right? So we have this user, and we are seeing this error because we have this sign-in function and we are not defining this here. So because I'm going to be managing this with useState, these functions, and the updates to these functions, I'm going to be using here react.dispatch, right? And this dispatch is going to be react.setStateAction. And these are just types for React. And now we need to define the type that this sign-in setter is going to be handling. In this case, is going to be the type of the user. And then we can delete this extra character. And finally, the sign out function is going to be just a simple function that is going to return void. Okay. Now here I have this error. The reason for that, it's because initial state, it's used before its declaration. So I'm just going to move this on top of this. Maybe I can put it all the way here. All right. And yeah, so we have the initial state for the user. we have this dot with these two functions, and you could have as many functions as you want, but you can add it here, and then you can share this across all the components that are going to be wrapped for this for this context, all right, and this provider. Great, so we are creating the context here, so we can go ahead and pass the initial state by putting it here, and now we can use this context. That's it. Now, the way we use a context in React, it's by using the hook useContext. And this hook looks like this. And when you want to use a context, you just pass the name of the context, or you pass the context. In this case, it's going to be this context. But we would need to do this every time that we need this context. Now, a cool way to abstract this a little bit, it's creating a custom hook that it's going to do this for us, so we don't have to import this and import use context and import out context every time that we want to use this context. So what we can do is export a hook here. I'm going to say export function use auth. Now this use auth is going to be a custom hook that is going to return the state of the context. So I can say that this function is going to return the context interface, because the state is going to look something like this, right? Now let's put this inside here, and let's actually save this context in a variable by saying const_context equal to use context, and then we grab the value here, and we can also specify the type of this by saying context interface, right? And now we can validate some things here. We can say if context it's equal to undefined, it means that we don't have anything here. So what we can do is just maybe throw a new error, and we can say use auth must be used within a provider, all right? This could happen if someone is trying to use this context or this hook and the component is not wrapped in a provider. And we're going to see what is a provider in a moment. But yeah, so once we pass this, we can simply return the context. And now we should be able to simply say, we should be able to simply grab these values from use auth. So for example, we could say const use auth, and then we can have the user from here, which is really nice, right? It's really handy. We have the information in one line of code, but we're not going to need this in a moment. Well, right here. And yeah, so we are exporting this because we're going to need this in other components. But yeah, this is how you can do that. Now let's go ahead and create another hook that is going to be in charge of protecting the routes. All right. So this is going to be called use protected route. And this hook is going to take a user, because we want to protect the home screen if we don't have a user. And if we don't have a user, we want to show the authentication screen. So we're going to pass this user as parameter to this hook. And then this hook is going to be using segments from use segments. This is a hook that we are importing from Expo router, as you can see here. And if I do hover here, this is going to return the segments of the navigation that we are defining inside this app. So we have auth, we have tabs, and we could have many more. And you can see those here. Tabs, we have, tabs, sign in. So we are grabbing these segments, and then we are going to say, well, this is a tricky part, because when I was integrating this, I was having some errors because I was accessing these segments and then try to manipulate them before the Expo router mounted. So the workaround that I found is that we can use the navigation state and use root navigation state, which is the other hook that we are importing from Expo router here. So this use root navigation state can let us know when the router has been loaded, so we can actually change the segment depending on the user. So I'm going to say here has navigated and set has navigated. Now this is a workaround that I had to do, guys, so we don't have the error that we are trying to navigate before this component mounts. So in order to do that, we're going to be using a use effect. So, and what we are doing inside this use effect is just checking. So I'm going to have this if statement, and I'm going to check if the navigation state dot key or has navigated. So if one of these two things it's true, we are going to return, because otherwise we're going to be having an infinite loop here, because I want to add this as well here. I'm going to add the user.uid. So I want to be running this validation every time that the user changes, and also every time that the segments change, navigation state, and also the has navigated. Right? These are dependencies for this use effect hook. And by having this if statement, we are preventing an infinite loop. All right, so now after this, we are going to graph the group by accessing the segments at position 0, and we're going to check for auth. All right. Now, I want to check if we have a user, right? So if I say user, if I say just user like this is going to be always true, because if you remember, we set the initial state to be an object, and this is true. This is going to be always true. But if I check for the UID, we should be able to validate if we don't have one. And if we don't also have the authentication on the group, what I want to do here is set the router.replace, and I want to replace, and this is another cool thing about router, that we have this autocomplete because all the routes are fully typed automatically for us. So I want to navigate to the sign-in screen if we don't have a user. So if we don't have a user and we don't have an in-out group that has this authentication, so if we are not in the auth segment and we don't have a user, then we want to take the current user to the authentication screen. And then, so we can prevent that we have navigated at this point, I'm going to say this variable to be true. And then I'm going to say else if the user.uid and in auth group, so this is the completely opposite, I can say dot replace, and we want to take the user to the home screen, which in this case is going to be the tabs. Then we can set this has navigated equal to true, so that we can prevent being iterating over and over again here. All right, and this is this use protected route hook. This is how it looks. And now we can use it. Now, to use this hook and to export the state of this, to be able to use the state of this context, we need a provider. So let's create a provider for this authentication. So I'm gonna say export function auth provider, right? This provider, it's going to basically wrap the components that we want to have access of the state, right? We want to have them to have access to the context state. So we're going to have a children here. And also this is going to return a JSX element. And I'm just going to return for now all right, give me 1 second. This children is going to be of type props with children from React. It's going to look something like this. Yep. And then what I want to return here is going to be the provider. So I'm going to access the auth context dot, and if I press dot, you can see that we have this provider. So let's access the provider, And inside this provider, we want to have a children. Now this provider is going to take a value. And this value is going to be these variables that we define here. So I'm just going to pass these values here. Now this user is going to come from the state. So we're going to be managing this user using useState. So I'm going to create a simple variable that is going to set the user using useState. And then we can pass the user initial state. And we can define as well that this is going to be of type user. And finally, before we get to this provider, we can say use protected route and pass the user. So this is going to navigate depending on if we have a user or not, right? Now, every time that we change the user, we're going to be running this line of code because this component is going to be re-rendering, and we're going to be validating that we have a user all the time. All right, now we need a use effect, and this use effect is going to be in charge of checking if the user is authenticated. And this user, and this use effect is going to be using the onAuth state change from Firebase, this method here. And this is basically a subscription that if you are familiar with Firebase, you may have used before. And just to don't waste too much time writing this, I'm just going to paste it here and I'm going to explain it to you. The things that I'm doing here is just setting up this subscription using onAuth state change. And this is going to take the instance of the authentication for Firebase. So I'm passing here my authentication. And then it's going to take a callback, or it's going to return the user every time that we detect something on the authentication. So if something changed on the authentication, we are going to get the user here. Once we get the user, we can simply validate if we have a user. It means that maybe someone just signed in. So let's grab this user and save the data that we care about, because this user is going to come with authentication token, and it's going to come with a lot of stuff. And so to see that, we can also put this on the console. I'm just gonna say here console log user, so you can see what we are getting every time that we are trying to authenticate the user. But this data that we are caring about here, it's yelling at me because I'm missing the email. So I'm gonna say email, and this is going to be equal to user. Maybe I can say metadata. No, it's going to be provider data, I think, position 0, email. All right. And now this is yelling at me again because this could be null, but I'm going to be sure that this is not going to be null because I'm going to be asking specifically for the email. Otherwise, the user could not sign in. So we are sure that we are going to have this value. That's why I'm putting this exclamation mark. All right, then we are putting this on the console. And if we detect that someone signed in, we want to set the user, this variable, that at the same time it's being passed down on this provider, which means that if a component inside this provider detects that this user changed, it's going to re-render and show the information. All right, then we are replacing the router for the tabs, and otherwise, if we don't have a user, we are replacing the router for the sign-in screen. Finally, when the component unmounts, we want to clear this subscription. So I'm going to say unsubscribe auth, which is this ID or this method that we are getting from this onAuth state change listener. All right, and that's it. So this is going to be running every time that we detect some changes. And finally, we are passing here the initial state for the user. Okay, so we are passing the sign-in function, which is just a setter for the user. And then the sign-out function is going to do two things. set the user to the initial state, and then sign out the user. And this sign out function, it's from Firebase, and this sign out function takes the authentication instance. So that's why I'm passing my authentication here that we have here, right? Keep that in mind. And that's it, guys. I promise you, this is the worst part, and we are done with it. So I'm gonna save this context, and now I need to make this, I need to use this context so that we can validate everything. Okay, so the way we can use this context, it's like I mentioned before, by wrapping the components that we want to have access to this context state. So if you remember, I told you that this layout file that we have here, this is going to be the entry point for our application. So this is the perfect place to set up this provider. Now I'm going to leave this theme provider that we have here, and I'm going to add my auth provider from my context. I want to wrap these things here, but because we are using Expo router, we don't need to have these screens here anymore. I can just simply render a slot, and this slot component is going to be coming from Expo router. So if I select this, you're going to see that we are importing this from Expo router. And basically this slot is going to be rendering whatever we are putting on the replace router here. So if you remember, we are replacing the router with these segments so that we don't need to do anything else here. So just put the slot, and it's going to be either authentication or either home screen. Okay, so let's hit save. And now I'm going to get an error. I'm not sure why. Let's try to reload this application. All right, and once I reload, you can see that, I don't know if you saw, but in the console, it said that I didn't have a user. So let me reload this again. All right, so we have this user is not authenticated, which is good. It means that this listener, it's working, and we are hitting this line of code, and we are putting this on the console, and also we are replacing the segment for the sign-in screen. So let's go ahead and work a little bit on the sign-in screen, because this is looking bad, right? So I'm gonna start by adding a font size here of 32, and then font weight of bold, and I'm gonna say style flex of 1, right? And if I hit save, and then I want to align items to the center and justify content to the center as well, so that we can see everything, right? Okay, so we have that. Now we need a button to handle the authentication. Okay, and one cool thing, guys, that I saw recently on one Medium post from Evan Bacon, which is one of the guys that works at Expo, is that he was importing Font Awesome as icon from Expo Vector Icons. And now the cool thing about this is that we can create a button from this. So if I go down here and say icon.button, and then inside this button, I put a text that says sign in with GitHub. And then this button is going to take the name of the icon that we want to use. And in this case, it's going to be GitHub. And if I hit save, just like that, we have this beautiful button here, which is really nice. And I didn't know that. So yeah, that's something new that we learned. And yeah, so this is going to take some properties, the name of the icon, of course, and we can also specify the background color. And the background color, because we have support for dark mode, transparent, I'm gonna put it transparent. And now it's going to look like this on dark mode and like this on light mode. And so we need to fix this. Let me just put this down here. Now I'm going to be changing the color of this text and this icon every time that the theme changes, right? So we can access the theme by saying current theme and using the use color scheme from React Native. And then we can simply check the current theme and check if it's equal to dark. I want to have this white, otherwise black. And if I hit save, you're gonna see that we have this icon. Now it's black. But what I want to do now is put a size of 30. And you can play with these values, maybe 40 if you want, but I think 30 is fine. Then we can also have an onPress event, of course, and this is going to be a function that is going to be triggering the authentication, or it's going to try to authenticate the user. So we have this working fine. Now I'm just going to add some text that I have here and remove this here. And if I hit save, this is how my application looks. You can play with this, of course. You can put something that you want. Now, once we have our UI, we can actually start integrating the sign-in stuff. And like I mentioned before, guys, we're going to be using Auth session from Expo. So we're going to need to set up the web browser. And this web browser is going to be imported from Expo web browser, which is one of the dependencies that we installed at the beginning. Then we can say web browser, and this is going to be like a listener that is going to be listening for an event in where maybe the user is trying to sign in. So we can say maybe complete Auth session. So if this browser detects that someone is trying to sign in, it's going to keep it inside the application by showing this web browser inside the application, right? Cool. So now another thing that we need to know, guys, when we are using GitHub is that we're going to need these endpoints, and you can get these endpoints on the documentation of GitHub. But basically we need this authorization endpoint, token endpoint, and then revocation endpoint, all right? And these endpoints are going to help us to get, for example, the access token of the user, get the authorization from the user, and also the connection between this user with our application on GitHub. That's why we need to specify the GitHub client ID here. And if you remember, this is going to be coming from this environment variable. And the way do you use these environment variables on Expo 49, it's just by saying process.env and then the name of the variable. In this case, it's going to be GitHub client ID. You can hard code this here, just copying this value and paste it here. But if you're going to put this on GitHub, I would recommend that you use environment variables. And yeah, that's the endpoints that we're going to be needing in a moment, and we're going to see how we can use this in a moment. But I want to take here, guys, just a couple minutes to explain how is that we are able as developers to access information from the user with this access token, all right? And like I mentioned before, I explained this a little bit before. When we are using the protocol OAuth, basically this protocol allows us to communicate or connect or associate or grab the information of the user from their provider, in this case, GitHub, so that they don't need to do anything, just authenticate to their GitHub account. And at the moment that we are doing this, we need to call these methods to ask GitHub for authorization. And then GitHub can ask the user if they want to share information with us. Once the user accepts, we are going to be granted an access token. And with this access token, guys, we can access not just information about the user, but we could do things behalf of the user. We could do things on GitHub on behalf of the user that is authenticated with us. And I'm going to show you guys an example at the end of this. But the way I would like to see this is that, for example, when you go to a hotel and you want to use I mean, you get like a card, right? Access card. But this card is not going to work for every room, right? It's just going to work for the room that you are staying in. So if you look this access token like a card that you can use on a hotel, this is basically how it works. GitHub is giving us this card that we can use to access the information of the user. But we can also ask for other things, like I mentioned before. And let's say that we are in the hotel and we also want access to the gym. So we can go to the front desk and we can ask access for the gym as well. And they are going to give us the same key maybe, or maybe another one. But now with these keys, we can access the gym, we can access our room. And in this case, on GitHub, we can access, for example, the information of the user, or we can access their follows, we can access their repositories on GitHub, their stars, and all kind of information, and also create repos on behalf of them and do actions for them. So this is really nice. This is really powerful, and you can do this with almost any big company like GitHub, Facebook, and whatever. All right, so I hope that makes sense. Now let's keep moving. Now what I want to do, guys, it's going to be inside this component, actually start the authentication process when the user presses this button. And we're gonna be using auth session, like I mentioned before. So I'm gonna be using this hook that is really handy, use auth request from Expo auth session, right? And if you pay attention, we are importing this from Expo auth session here. So yeah, this is going to take some things. As you can see here, it's yelling at me because I haven't provided this configuration. It's going to take the client ID. The client ID, if you recall, is going to be inside the environment variables. And then I can just simply copy this from here, copy this here, and put it here. All right, and also it needs the scopes. The scopes are the data or the permissions that we want to be granted. And like I mentioned before, this would be access to a room, access to the gym, access to the pool. And this is where you ask for these permissions. So we also need a redirect URI, sorry. And we can call this make redirect URI from Expo auth session as well. So this is going to create the redirect URL. And yeah, so once we have this, we also need to specify another parameter. And this is going to be the endpoints. So discovery is going to be the endpoints that we are setting up here. And we need to pass those here because this hook is going to be in charge of asking for the token, asking for the authorization, and it's going to do everything for us. We just need to pass these endpoints, all right? All right. Now this is yelling at me because this could be undefined. So let's go ahead and put this exclamation point, and this is working out. Cool. So now this use auth request hook is going to return three things. It's going to return a request, a response, and a prompt async. The response is going to be basically if everything went well, we're going to have the information and the token of the user inside this response. Then we also have this prompt async, which is the method that we're going to be calling to start the authentication process, right? So let's go ahead and just add this logic to the bottom so we can see how this is going to work. So inside this on press, I'm going to say prompt async, and I'm just going to hit save. Now this should prompt the user, and also you can pass some configuration here. And if I do Command I to have autocomplete, We can set things like, for example, window name. And in this case, we could say code with Beto and stuff like that. You can also leave this empty. It doesn't really matter. If you want, we can delete this here. But if I now go to my device and press sign in with GitHub, I'm going to be asked if I want to be redirected to github.com. I'm going to say continue, and I'm going to be taken to this screen where I'm going to be asked to give permissions to GitHub. So this is working fine. This is working correctly, and we should be able to redirect back because we set this, if you pay attention here, we set this, this redirect to Beto. So I'm gonna say authorized, and we are coming back to Beto. But in this case, we are not handling anything at this point. The response, we are not doing anything with the response. So let's go ahead and create a function that is gonna be handling this response every time that we detect a user that is signing in. So I'm going to create this function. It's going to be async, and the name is going to be handle response. And for this, what I want to do here, it's going to be just check this response right here. So we can access these variables inside this function without any problem. So let's go ahead and check this response. And if the response dot type is equal to, and here we have the types of responses that we can have, but we are just interested in the success. If everything went well, what I want to do here is maybe just say console.log of the response. All right. Now we need to call this function every time that the response changes. So we can do that in a use effect. So I'm going to use this use effect, and the use effect is going to be running every time that the response changes. And what I want to do here is just handle the response. That's all we need. And if I hit save and clear my terminal, open my terminal here, I'm going to try to sign in again. And if you pay attention, we are getting this response. We are getting this code. We are getting this state, and the error is null because everything went well. We can see here that it says success. And yeah, so we have everything working fine at this point. But what can we do with this information? I mean, it doesn't really do anything, right? So at this point, guys, we have authorization of the user. So what I can do here is actually abstract the code that we have down here, this code, and use this code to get information. And I know this because I read the documentation of GitHub, and you need this code. So if I abstract this code from this response.params, and then with this code, I get information. So let's actually create a function that is going to help us to create, to get the information that we want. So this function is going to look something like this. And here we're going to have stuff, right? So once we have this code, we can create a token. And with that token, it's going to be like the access card for the hotel. With that token, we can do whatever we want. But we need to exchange this code with GitHub and ask for a token. So let's go ahead and create this function. I'm going to create a new folder here on the root. And this folder is going to be utils. It's going to contain utility functions. So I'm just going to copy the name of this function and create a new file and put it .ts. All right. This is going to be a post request, guys. And I'm going to be using just the fetch method that comes with JavaScript. So nothing crazy. We are not going to be using any external library. This is going to be an async function, and the name is going to be create token with code. So we need to pass a code that is a string as parameter. And yep, this is going to look something like this. And now what I can do here is define the endpoint. So the endpoint is going to look like this, guys. This is how the endpoint is going to look. Basically here we are passing who we are, which application is using this information, in this case called with Beto app. We pass the client ID. We need to pass the client secret as well. And this is the client secret. If you remember, we put it here. And yeah, so I'm putting this using the environment variables. And finally, the code that we are receiving after the user has accepted to share their information with our application. So down here, this is my endpoint, right? I can actually get a response from a page passing this URL. Now, this is going to be a post request, so I'm going to specify the method to be post. And then we need to specify some headers for authentication for the data type and content type. So I'm just going to paste this here. Right? So once we have this, we should be able to get some response. So I'm just going to return the response.json. And that's all this function needs to do. Just a fetch request to OAuth endpoint of GitHub, passing all the information and the code that we just got from the user. And this is going to return us the access token. It's also going to return us the scope and the access token. So I'm just going to grab this and abstract it from here. Instead of having this stuff, I'm going to have this token type, the scope, and access token. All right. Now let's import this function and we should be good to go. So we are passing here the token, if you pay attention. Sorry, the code that we are grabbing here. And once we have this, we can put it on the console so we can see what's going on. Let's try to run this again. I'm going to clean the terminal and let's sign in again. All right. Okay, so we are not seeing anything here. Not sure why. Oh yeah. So yeah, this is working. Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with me. But yeah, here we have the access token. And this is this value. We have the scope. We don't have anything here. But we have the token type as well, which is very rare, right? Cool. So once that we have the token, like I mentioned before, we can do whatever we want. Now I want to have just a simple validation here that is going to check if we don't have an access token. It means that maybe the user canceled or did something else. So we can simply return early. So by having this checkpoint, we shouldn't get to these lines of code if the user cancels or does something. Now, at this point, guys, we are good to authenticate the user because we have their information. And the way you get their information would be just doing another fetch request with the access token if you are doing this manually. But because we are using Firebase, what we can do is use one of the methods from Firebase and just give them the token and they are going to take care of everything for us. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to create a new credential. And for this credential, I'm going to be using GitHub Auth Provider. And this is a class that we can import from Firebase Authentication. We are going to need as well our auth instance. So this is going to have methods because it's a class, and we have this credential, and this is going to create the credentials for the user by passing the accessing token, right? So let's pass this access token, and finally, this is going to allow us to sign in the user with this credential into Firebase. So I'm going to say await, then sign in with credential. which is another method that we can use from the SDK of Firebase. And if I hover over this, you can see that this is going to take the auth and also the credential. And this is going to return the user credential, right? So let's do that. Sign in with credential. We need the auth. So I'm going to import this from Firebase configuration. This is the instance of my service in my backend. Then we also need to pass the credential, which is this one, all right? And this is going to give us finally the precious data that we want from the user, okay? Now let's put this on the console again. So let's console log this data, hit save. Now at this point, we should be able to see the user authenticated here. So let's try this again. Sign in with GitHub, continue, all right? All right, and it worked. It worked well. Of course, we are not handling anything, but if I reload this, we should see that now we have this authenticated user. Now let's go to the console and see what's going on with the information that we are getting here. Of course, this is a mess, but if you pay attention here we have my data, which is display name, email verified, expires in, and if you want, you can press Command F and search for things like email. And we don't have the email here. All right, undefined. I don't know why it's undefined, to be honest. But we can access the username. Let's say username, betomoedano. We have the photo URL. And this is the photo URL. And if you don't believe me, we can just copy this and put it here. And this is my photo. So this is working. Yeah, so we have the information that we wanted. Now what we can do here is just do whatever we want with this data. Now, another thing that is worth noting, guys, is that when we are signing in the user here, signing in with credential, we are effectively triggering this auth context, this auth state change listener, which is setting this data inside the context, the user context, and replacing the navigation for tabs. So we are setting the data we care about from this response. And if we put this on the console, we put this on the console. That's why we got a lot of information here. But yeah, we should be able at this point to just go to any screen inside this application and access the information that we want. So just to show how this works, let's go to the tab number one. Tab number one, oops, inside this index. And let's say that we want to access the information of the user here. So I can use my hook, use auth, and this is going to allow me to destructure the user information like this. And I can just simply change this, instead of being tab one, to be user dot. And because we define the type of this user, we can simply have autocomplete, which is amazing. And then display, for example, the display name, right? And if I hit save, it says Alberto. And we can duplicate this. We can have, for example, let's say the provider ID, which is GitHub. And I don't have my email, I think. This should be null. Yeah, I don't know why. Let me think. Let's go to the create token. Nope. Let's go to the sign in screen. All right. I know what's the problem, guys. We didn't specify any scopes. That's why we are not getting the user. Now, this is a really good example because I didn't specify this. We are getting basic information. But if I specify these scopes, and you can learn more about these scopes and what you can ask ask for the user in the documentation, GitHub documentation. So for example, we can access the repo status. We can access, if I search for user, yeah, we can access the email by specifying user colon email. That's why we are putting here user colon email and user follow. This is very interesting because if I go here to user follow, we can see that grants access to follow or unfollow other users, which is really nice, right? It could be fun that we have this functionality to follow other users inside your application. So yeah, we can do cool things like that. And you can learn more about it and on the GitHub documentation. So once we have updated the scopes, this is really interesting because now if I sign out from the application, so let's go to the index and try to sign out. To sign out, this is going to be super easy. In still one line of code, we can import this sign out function and just create a button quickly from React Native that says sign out. And whenever we press this, we just call sign out. So let's sign out. And just like that, I mean, this is perfectly fine. And if I reload, I should be able to, I should stay on the auth section, which is where I am. So this is working. And now, if I try to sign in again, this is really interesting. GitHub is going to let me know that this application has requested more scopes. So I need to agree. Let's try it, right? Okay, and it's asking me again, so it's not going straight to the point because at this point, it's telling me that I'm trying to access personal user data like follow users and email addresses. Read only though. So let's authorize. And now we should be able to have an email. So let's go down here and search for an email. Let's see if we have something here. Email. Okay, I don't see anything. Let's try to email here. What's going on? Let me clear this out because I can not see anything. All right, and if I reload, this is working. Okay, now we have access to the email, which is really nice. We have access to the picture, which if I go here and just create an image super quickly so you can see how you can do it. When we are using images from React Native, we can specify the source to be a URI and then just pass the user photo URL. And of course, we need to specify a style, width, and height. So I'm gonna say maybe 200 by 200 height. And if I hit save, we can see my photo there. So this is working fine. Let me just delete these things that we are not using. Yeah. And this is how you can access the information, guys. And now if I reload the application, I'm coming back to this screen and we can see the information pretty fine. So we don't have to do anything and pretty much we can access this data anywhere in the application. All right. So yeah, this is how you can access this information. But now as a bonus part, if you made it this far, I wanted to show you guys how you can follow someone, right? So what I want to do here is actually when anyone signs into my application, I want them to follow me on GitHub. How can we do that? Well, every time that we are handling the response here on the sign-in screen, after we get the access token, like I mentioned before, you can use this access token to do whatever you want with GitHub. So what I'm going to do here, it's actually a fetch request. And I'm going to do this here in line. Of course, it would be a good idea to abstract this function inside this utilities folder. But what I'm going to do here is just do this fetch that is going to hit this endpoint from GitHub. And this is just following, and then we need to specify the name of the person that we want to follow. This is my username, betomoedano. So whenever someone's signing into the application, we are going to call this method put, passing the access token of the user, which means this is going to go through and GitHub is going to follow me in this case, of course. So yeah, then finally, if we get the response, we're gonna put on the console successfully followed, otherwise failed to follow. And yeah, so this is just an example of how you can do cool stuff with the access token from GitHub. And I believe that this is all I wanted to show you guys for this tutorial. I hope you like it. I hope you learned something new. Don't forget to go to codewithbeto.dev if you want to become a master in React Native. Check out the courses, fully available in English. And of course, we have a great discount opportunity to get the React with TypeScript course. This course is going to be super complete. It's in the process. We are currently working on this course, but that's why we are offering a super discount and also 2 years access to the course. So if you want to check that out, it's going to be available as well on English and Spanish. So both, if you want to improve your Spanish as well. And yeah, guys, so that's all I wanted to show you. I hope you liked this video. Don't forget to go to codewithbeto.dev. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.